When we talk about decarbonization, it is a less spoken of concept in these emerging countries, even though it is a globally accepted, very popular concept. So, could you run us through what decarbonization means in the context of ports?
Yes, of course. Maybe start by indeed emphasizing the importance of ports for economies, right? I think ultimately the productivity and the reliability of ports of countries really reflect the economic state of countries, can be powerful flywheels for the development of countries. Ultimately, if you have a productive and reliable port that helps imports and exports, lowers the cost of imports and exports, and therefore can be really a flywheel for economic development. If you then look specifically, I think, at world-class modern ports today and decarbonization within those ports, it's pretty simple. So you've got the port operations itself that you want to decarbonize, and then you want to decarbonize the ecosystem around it. And that can have benefits in terms of competitiveness and in terms of resilience of your ports.
Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Front Row. And today I have with me Tim Miltenburg, the Global Head of Decarbonisation at APM Terminals from Netherlands. Now, Tim, when we speak about Sri Lanka's ports, for centuries it has been the center of focus for many global powers. And this has attracted a lot of attention to the country. But if we take a look at our ports, I wouldn't call them the most modernized ports out there. And so, though with improvement, they hold a lot of potential. And in talking about this modernization of ports, from your experience, so since you are into decarbonization and that area, when we talk about decarbonization, it is a less spoken of concept in these emerging countries, even though it is a globally accepted, very popular concept. So, could you run us through what decarbonization means in the context of ports?
Yes, of course. Let me maybe start by indeed emphasizing the importance of ports for economies, right? I think ultimately the productivity and the reliability of ports of countries really reflect the economic state of countries and can be powerful flywheels for the development of countries. Because ultimately, if you have a productive and reliable port that helps imports and exports, lowers the costs of imports and exports, and therefore can be really a flywheel for economic development. If you then look specifically, I think, at world-class modern ports today and decarbonization within those ports, it's pretty simple. So you've got the port operations itself that you want to decarbonize, and then you want to decarbonize the ecosystem around it. And that can have benefits in terms of competitiveness and in terms of resilience of your ports. If we look at the port operation to begin with, emissions in port operations mainly stem from equipment and assets that burn diesel, right? And what you want to do with those assets ideally is electrify them. That is, in our view, the most cost competitive way of decarbonizing port operations. And then if you look at the broader port ecosystem, there it's a combination of factors. So there's also going to be a very important role for electrification. If you look at, for example, rail, trucks coming in and out of terminals, tugboats, pilot boats, etc. There's a role for electrification in terms of providing shore power to vessels when they're alongside. But ultimately, there's also a role to play for other alternative energy infrastructure, such as green fuels, which will be required to actually decarbonize the ocean transportation piece in the future. So that's, I think, very broadly what decarbonization of ports and container terminals is about.
Yes, and you mentioned so a lot of changes that need to be made for to a traditional port to become a decarbonized port, and I'm guessing it doesn't come easy. So when we take in terms of the capabilities that developing countries have, what are the most common barriers they would face in decarbonizing them, and how can we overcome those barriers?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would say in terms of key barriers that I see, and maybe let's take a step back, right? Because there are actually quite a few very modern and also to quite some extent already decarbonized ports in many, which I guess you would call more developing countries around the world. So if you look at one of the ports or terminals that we operate as a public-private partnership in Malaysia, Port of Tanjung Pelepes, it's to a large extent already electrified, and it's one of the most productive ports in the world. We've got similar examples from Ghana and West Central Africa and Callao. So I do think there is no need per se for more developing countries to run behind in terms of port decarbonization. Now, that said, there are sometimes barriers, right? And I would say access to capital is one, right? It does require investments in infrastructure and assets to be able to electrify and decarbonize your port. Two, for that to be able to do that, you also need certain engineering and operating capabilities. If there's a strong history of ports and terminals in a country, then sometimes that is there. But that's not always the case. If that sort of history is there, that workforce and those capabilities haven't been built, then you might need to bring in those capabilities. And then I think third, there is an element of having a supportive policy and regulatory framework that sets the right boundary conditions in terms of safeguards, but doesn't have too much red tape for, foreign direct investment, for example, to happen. And I think a flywheel here really is public-private partnerships to bring in, for example, foreign private partners that have access to capital, have good engineering and operating capabilities, and partner those with the capabilities of the respective country in terms of access to skilled labor, the workforce, the social capital, and of course the land that is owned by the local governments.
Yes. Could you focus on maybe an example or two where they had these partnerships, where they implemented some focusing on some key strategies that they implemented to actually modernize or transform these ports into decarbonized ports?
Yeah. So I think a good example, maybe, I mean, the ones that I mentioned, I think are good examples, but let's maybe stick with the one in Malaysia, Port of Tanjung Pelepas, which is a terminal that's seen tremendous growth as one of the largest terminals in the world. It's like I said, it's a public-private partnership, and ultimately, what drives success in these types of partnerships is aligning around shared objectives, building trust between the different parties, that we know that what we say we will deliver on, and vice versa. And I think from there on out, it's about developing a very concrete plan and an investment case and a business case that is investable, that identifies, okay, what are the key levers for modernization and decarbonization in this specific port, and then working together to execute against that plan.
And so, in talking about this decarbonization, it sounds like a very modern concept and a modern trend. But it itself is, say, evolving. So, could you take us through some of the new trends that are taking place in terms of decarbonization?
Yeah, of course. So I think one of the key trends that I see is, I spoke a bit about electrification already, right? But really the combination of battery electrification and renewable electricity, which is driven by accelerating technological development. So you have rapid cost downs of battery technology, rapid cost downs of renewables, as well as rapid improvements in energy density, for example, of batteries, which is really driving us to a point where it's becoming increasingly more cost competitive to run container terminals on battery electric equipment and renewable electricity versus on diesel powered equipment. And battery technology is a further flywheel, in the sense that battery energy storage then allows us to even run ports at lower cost, because it allows you to optimize your electricity consumption and your electricity purchasing. So I think that is really a key technological trend. And then second, I think you see diverging trends in the political landscape, with some parts of the geopolitical spectrum becoming increasing proponents of decarbonization and supporting decarbonization and implementing policy frameworks that support decarbonization. And other parts, unfortunately, of the geopolitical spectrum, less so supportive of decarbonization and the policy measures that are required. And we really call upon all governments to ensure that we have the right policy framework in place.
Yes, and now, so zooming into Sri Lanka, when you take our country, we have been through back-to-back crises, so social crisis, economic crisis, political, geopolitical, all that has a. And it's not only Sri Lanka. So multiple developing countries face continuous challenges. So in such a challenging environment, so where we don't have strong financial and technological capabilities, what could be some of the realistic first steps towards decarbonization? So you mentioned
Yeah, electrification. Yeah, indeed.
yes. So
hmm
maybe even in that, how if we go deeper, how can we get started? What's the
Yeah.
starting point?
No, I think that's a really good question, right? And I think what you can always do and what requires relatively little financial investments are things like focusing on energy efficiency, energy optimization, and actually conserving and reducing energy. And there's many measures that you can take that actually have very little upfront investment required and very short payback period. So I would say always start there, looking at, any energy that you don't consume is better for the planet, better for your wallet. The second thing is tapping into renewable electricity, either through on-site, which requires some investment, so maybe is more prohibitive, but also increasingly renewable electricity contracts where you enter into a power purchase agreement to decarbonize your electricity supply. Those typically come at very little upfront investment or no upfront investment, often offer a discount actually on your electricity rates, and help you secure a renewable supply of electricity without having to have either much financial muscle or technological capabilities. From there on out, I would say it's indeed about electrification. And then it's about, like I said, about those public-private partnerships, attracting foreign direct investment to help unlock those opportunities as well. And I would say also, I wouldn't underestimate the people and the capabilities in the workforce in Sri Lanka, but of course, sometimes other players are needed to unlock things here and there.
Yeah, special skills, sometimes
Yep.
expertise.
Yeah.
Now, assuming that we actually go through these challenges and implemented decarbonized ports, what would be, say, the long-term economic benefits, especially for developing countries like ours?
Yeah. I would say I would see the benefits of decarbonization and electrification also specifically in sort of three categories. There's economic benefits in the sense that increasingly overall the total cost of operating electric terminals is lower than that of diesel ones. So ultimately, it just makes economic sense. Like I said, it can help attract foreign direct investment, which I think for a country like Sri Lanka is also interesting, especially if a country or an economy is somewhat cash strapped, then that can be appealing. So that's one, right? It really can improve your competitiveness. Two is actually improving energy security for a country. So if we talk about Sri Lanka, right, if you couple electrification with the massive renewable electricity potential that this country has, and there's already a lot of renewable electricity here on the grid, you basically decouple your energy supply from fossil fuel imports that can be relatively volatile and sometimes somewhat unreliable. So I think there's an element of energy security. And then I think third and last, but definitely not least, there's a lot of benefits to workers and communities. Electric equipment causes no or very little local air pollution. So it's better for not only the workers in the port and the terminal, but also for the communities that surround the terminal. And if you believe, like we do, that electrification is the future, it's also about building, upskilling the workforce of the future in terms of how do we design, engineer, commission, operate, and maintain fully electric container terminals, but also other infrastructure, right? So I think across those three elements for me are the main long-term benefits of decarbonization.
All right. And so if we take Sri Lanka in our, say, the upcoming strategies, we are currently working on digitalizing most of the services,
Yep.
most of the operations.
Mm-hmm.
So we are also implementing a national single window. So these operations are going on. So how important is data integration among all these port operators' operations in developing or creating a modern decarbonized port system?
I think it's incredibly important. So if you look at, and let's distinguish two things. So there's one element of having the right data and reliable data within a port or within a terminal in terms of being able to optimize your operation, making it operationally excellent, right? You want to visualize, analyze the processes that you run to understand where the bottlenecks are so that you can optimize them. it's also critical for energy optimization. If you have granular data on what's driving energy consumption in your terminal, you can also identify where are the optimization levers. So it's critical within, and it's also critical across sort of the port ecosystem, right? But that is a little bit a holy grail, I would say, that also so-called developing countries haven't fully cracked, right? How can you integrate all of the data from vessel departure far away to vessel arrival to spending time at anchorage and all those steps within that chain? Having the right data in the right format available at the right time to the right decision makers is something that entities like Portbase in the Netherlands and in the Port of Rotterdam are trying to tackle. But it is a challenging one, right? So I would say start within the confines of the ports and the terminal, and then from there on out expand to sort of cross-port collaboration on data integration and utilization.
Yes. And so taking a futuristic look, if we look ahead, and what do you see as one, the biggest opportunity, and then the biggest risk for ports worldwide, especially in this developing country context?
That's a really good question. And I think we find ourselves in a particularly dynamic environment at the moment, and Sri Lanka specifically with the recent tragedies, of course. But if I look a bit more long term, I would say the biggest opportunity is the untapped potential of running ports and terminals more productively, I would say, right? There's so much waste still today in the whole end-to-end process of, a vessel coming alongside, offloading the vessel, running the operations in the terminal, all the way from the point of departure of the vessel, that what we see even in our ports, but definitely also across other ports and terminals, there's just massive untapped potential in terms of operational excellence and really getting more out of the assets that we already have deployed. I think the biggest risk that I see, also if you look at this from an investment perspective, right, is geopolitical instability across the world, right? Geopolitical instability means that it becomes more difficult to create investment cases, more difficult to deploy capital and to convince people to deploy capital. So both on a global level, but also on a regional and local level, I think geopolitical and more specifically political stability is crucial to basically accelerate progress in the ports and terminal space.
Yes. So finally, with your experience, so you lead a set of large terminal operations. So with that experience, what mindset or leadership approach do you think, do you see as the most critical for driving meaningful transformation in ports?
There's a lot of things I could say to that, but I think what I genuinely believe is that great people build great companies and therefore great terminal operators. So it's really about, for me, really about as leaders, as leadership of a company, about helping develop, upskill, and empower the people and the workforce of a company to help us basically take our terminal operations to the next level. And that's really, for me, the key distinguishing leadership feature of successful container and terminal operators in the future.
Yes. So thank you so much for your insight. And we will see you again with another episode of Front Row. Thank you.
Thank you.